We're here today to talk about women and retirement. I do need to point out as we get started that the views of the panelists are their own individual views and not the views of the congressman.
I'm here to learn as well, Amanda. It's a very pertinent time for us to have this conversation, and I'm very pleased.
I think we should start by maybe defining the problem, that there is this gap between men and women in retirement. And Max, I know your organization has an initiative called Eleanor's Hope to really focus on this.
Right. Well, we began Eleanor's Hope, which is, of course, named after Eleanor Roosevelt, who, legend has it, presented herself as the eyes and ears of the president, and spent a lot of time focusing on inequality and especially women's issues. And what we see in Social Security is a very clear gap. The average benefit, Social Security benefit for a woman in this country is about $300 less a month than for a man. That's a significant change, and it has dramatic repercussions all through the life of a woman in this country. Women have, as we all know, have had to experience lower wages for a long time, which means they saved less, had less available to put into pensions if they were even available, and we know defined benefit pensions have pretty much disappeared, even more for women than for men. And their contributions to Social Security were lower because of lower wages, which means their benefits are lower. Then there's the added dimension of the fact that often women leave the workforce to care for children, they're the ones that care for an aged parent. So the number of years that they work, and that's part of the computation of their Social Security benefit, is reduced. Again, their Social Security benefit is lower. And then finally, they live longer. And that's a good thing for them, but it's a bad thing if they're trying to depend on whatever savings, whatever pension they might have, and a lower Social Security benefit to provide for their well-being, all their needs for a lifespan that is quite a bit longer than for a man. All of those reasons cry out for changes.
We have had a number of discussions in our office on these issues, and we're hopeful that we can get to some of these on the floor, because it doesn't do much good for them to sit in committee. What are some of the proposals, Max, that you see in Congress that would address some of these inequalities?
There's legislation been introduced by your colleague, Nita Lowey, in the House a couple of times now, a couple of Congresses, that would develop a formula for interpreting those years of leaving the workforce and have them count towards credits, Social Security quarterly credits. And that it's not just you leave the workforce because you don't want to work, you leave it because you need to care for a child, that has to all be spelled out, or to care for an elderly parent. And I think it's 5 or 6 years of credits that you could get. That would have a big impact on the Social Security benefit that a woman would receive. And as I mentioned, it's about $300 a month less now. That would impact that. There's, speaking to the point about women living longer, I'm sorry, we can't enjoy that.
We can't accompany you. And
Congressman and I are going to do our best to stick around.
We're going to stay healthy.
Right. But there are proposals in the Congress I hope you'll take a look at that would add a special benefit. Actually two. One that would add an additional benefit for someone who has reached the age of 85. That's going to be more women than men. Because in that case, an individual will more likely to have outlived their savings. And as women live longer, they're going to need that extra little help. And it's about $70 a month. There's legislation in the House that would do that. There's legislation that would add increase the minimum benefit for everybody. but it would have a bigger impact for women because their benefit is already reduced. And finally, I've talked to the congressman about this. There's legislation. It's part of other pieces of other bills that would increase the COLA, the cost of living adjustment. Everybody that gets a Social Security check, and you'll experience this soon, keeps in mind a COLA what a COLA is. It's a cost of living adjustment, and it's not a lot, but it's sometimes $19, sometimes $14 a month, and it makes a big difference when you're just living on Social Security, which many people are.
How many people in this country are living exclusively or nearly exclusively on Social Security?
It's about 65% of beneficiaries depend on Social Security for all of their income, and an even greater percentage, I don't know the number right now, depend on it for 90% of their income. So it's really the bottom line. And the cost of living adjustment is so important. And what I'm talking about is a new formula that would be used to determine how much the cost of living adjustment should be. The current formula is based on inflation from one year to the next as it affects a wage earner. Takes into account that market basket of goods and services that a wage earner depends on. But that's a whole different proposition than a senior who has different needs, depends on health care, for example, much more. And the consumer price index elderly, it's called, is the one I'm talking about. It's not in place, but if it were in place, it would measure inflation as it affects a senior and make the appropriate adjustment. And it would be not a lot more, but a little bit more. And keep in mind, the COLA is like a savings account. It's compounded. So every addition one year has an impact on out years.
I want to pick up on something you said earlier. Is this misunderstanding of poverty in America? Poverty in America is widespread in all generations, and it's throughout the state of Nebraska. Even in we think in rural Nebraska the poverty level must be less. It's actually in many respects higher. Schools out in the western part of the state with 70 to 80% free and reduced lunch. I found in working with elderly in the housing area that so many times elderly retired women who've worked all their lives and they literally have Social Security as their is what they had to live on, and want to be able to take care of their grandchildren, want to be able to do the things everybody else does, but they came from another generation and they don't have any capital. They never had any capital, really. I mean, this is not just in the minority population, but throughout the state. So that's a condition we don't want to have happen in the future.